Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. This week on the show, Tony and I are discussing the top 12 books that every hunter and angler should read. These are books that will make you a better hunter and angler, books that will make you think, and books that through the page will take you on some of the wildest adventures imaginable. All right, welcome back to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light and their Camo for Conservation initiative. And today, I'm here with my buddy Tony for a different kind of podcast. Today, we are not going to be telling you about how to kill a deer. We're not going to be telling you about how to do timber stand improvement or hang a tree stand or be a better conservationist or anything like that. We're going to talk to you about something that requires very little physical work. Tony, it's about as easy as it comes. You can just kind of take your fingers and pull a page and pull it to the next one, and there it is. That's all the work you got to do. We're flipping pages today. Talking books. This is something that I do sometimes on social media. I have written articles about this. But we've done few podcasts, a few where we've dabbled in talking about books. But I thought today the idea would be to talk through the top books that we think that every hunter and angler should read. And this is on my mind right now, and I think it's on your mind too, because I've been getting ready for some trips. And I know you're getting ready for a trip. And one of the most important things for me when I'm heading out on a week-long trip anywhere, hunting or fishing or camping or anything, I spend an inordinate amount of time picking what books I'm going to bring. My wife thinks I'm crazy. She gets mad at me because I can't ever just bring one, because like the worst thing is to bring one book and then finish it and then not have anything else to read, right? I end up bringing like 2, 3. I've been known to bring 4 books on a week-long vacation before. So I don't know. I might have a problem. But that's kind of my idea, Tony, is to kind of talk through some of our top book recommendations, since we need some book recommendations leading into our trips, right?
Right. I'm good with it, buddy.
And you're heading where soon?
I am flying down to Florida here in about 8 hours, and tomorrow morning I'll be fishing in the salt, and I cannot freaking wait.
Yeah, I'm very jealous of you. I have, from our recording today, I have 9 days until I leave for Florida. So we're going to be crossing paths. We're going to be almost intersecting while we're down there.
We can wave from the plane windows.
Yeah. So what all do you have on the itinerary? You said like tomorrow's offshore, like deep water fishing?
Yep. So almost every time I've ever been down, well, I shouldn't say that every time I've ever been down there, the weather has not allowed to go out on the big water. And so we've fished inshore, fished the lagoons, the rivers, whatever. And we just have this like unbelievably consistent forecast. And so we're heading out to catch, big spinner sharks and all kinds of stuff tomorrow. And that's going to be really fun. And then after that, we'll have a canoe to go paddle around in the mangroves and try to target snook and trout and, whatever drum, whatever else we can find. And it's going to be really fun.
Do you have any advice for me on some of that inland kind of stuff? Because we're going to be down in 9 days, and we're going to be doing some like fishing in the flats, like for tarpon, bonefish, that kind of thing, with people who really know what they're doing. But we're also going to be doing a little bit of stuff in the Everglades, and we're going to be checking out some of these like canal systems and these backwaters. And I'm thinking we might be able to catch a bunch of random stuff in there on a fly rod. I even saw someone catching peacock bass in one of the spots that I know we're going to be exploring. Anything that you've experienced doing some of that? Because I know you've got a little more experience than me on that side of things.
Man, there's 2 things that all those fish eat: live shrimp. So anything that you have that looks like a shrimp is going to work well. And then just small minnows. I mean, it's crazy down there. We're not fly fishing on this trip. We'll go throw little 2-inch swim baits that would look like a white streamer, just a minnow pattern, and you catch everything. Or, if we go by a couple dozen live shrimp and throw them around. Everything eats it. It's like just like a universal food source down there. So anything that looks like that is going to get chomped on.
Sweet.
And if you're around, I'm not exactly sure where you're going to be, but the other thing that if you're around any of the trout, any, jacks, some of that stuff, anything with like a streamer with like gold tinsel, something that looks, gold, and it seems to work really well. So,
Okay.
But I go little and just try to match, what everything's eating. You'll catch all kinds of stuff.
That's the thing I'm excited about maybe the most is just like the random diversity of stuff you could get into.
Yep.
Like you cast a line in it and who knows what's going to be down there. So yeah, I'm pumped.
That's what makes it fun. I mean, that is, it probably sounds so stupid, but that mystery of like not knowing that environment very well and not knowing what you're going to catch and like learning as you go. Sometimes we forget that stuff when you're really used to, hunting in the back 40 or hunting the farm you grew up on. Is like, the deer come out here, they walk through here, the turkeys strut in this field. It's kind of like there's comfort in that, but it's also, there's not a lot of mystery. And man, when you live in the, close to Canada and then you get to spend some time in the salt, you discover some cool stuff.
Yeah. Nice change of pace. That's for sure. So do you have a book picked out for the trip yet?
So I'm not sure yet. This is that experiment they do with kids where they're like, it's a psychological experiment where they're like, hey, you can have one marshmallow now.
Yeah, I know this one.
Or 2 in an hour. Yep. I was trying to save Cormac McCarthy's last book, Stella Maris. Mm-hmm. Just because it's a short book. I knew it wouldn't take very long. It's a good vacation book, but I finished it last night. And so, because I started to get into it and I just really liked it. And so now I'm not sure. Sometimes, and we'll talk about this on my list, but sometimes on trips like this, I like to go back to like an old favorite. Like I might bring Blood Meridian, or I might bring some book that I just know I love. Yeah. And because that's what I do sometimes in the spring when I'm turkey hunting. If I'm bow hunting specifically and sitting in a blind all day, sometimes I just go run through a few of my old favorites because it's just like kind of like a comfort thing,
Mm-hmm. Do you like to read books about something in season when you're doing the thing? So I guess what I'm getting at is like, are you reading books about hunting during hunting season when you're out there? Or do you read about fishing when it's fishing season? Or is it like the opposite? Like during the winter, you're reading about fishing because you want to go fishing,
I don't structure it seasonally. Like I don't really care about that. And I honestly don't, and people will get this from my list, but I don't, like if it's September, October, I'm not seeking out hunting books, yeah. And honestly, the stuff that I like, so much of it is kind of adventure stuff from the past or something, like I really love a lot of the gunwriter books from Africa back in the day, even though it's like just to look into like this machismo, functioning alcoholism, fill up your trophy room. But I love that the idea of back then of those guys would be like, we're going from New York or wherever they live to some part of Africa, and they're going to go on like a 3-month safari, and like at a time when it was so much more wild. And so, no, I don't. I like books that just, they bring you somewhere and there's like a real feel for the place. It doesn't have to like jive with my life at all. I kind of like it when it doesn't, although I did put one author on my list that does write about a lot of stuff that's pretty familiar to me and probably you too, I would guess.
Yeah, I have a couple different things when I'm reading books that are related to hunting fishing. Number one, I do find like there's certain times of the year when I'm just like craving the thing. Like I kind of look at books are like my TV. Like I don't watch a whole lot of TV, but I like flip the station a lot based on what I'm feeling. You know what I mean?
So give me an example of that. Like what's a time where you're like, I gotta seek out this kind of book?
Yeah. So like in the middle of the winter, when I'm, you're stuck in this kind of just that dead of the night, kind of short days, you're socked in. And that's when I'm definitely reaching for a book that's going to take me on a fishing adventure or like, an Alaskan expedition or something. Just like that, when I'm craving adventure because I've been stuck not doing it, that's when I reach for those books that take me far away to do the thing I want to do. While maybe in the summer, when I'm out doing those kinds of things already, that is more often when I'm picking up a book that's going to make me think maybe a little bit more, like a slightly more philosophical book, or a book that's maybe more about conservation or hunting ethics or something like that, like a little bit more of that kind of thing, because I don't need to scratch the itch of adventure or fishing because I'm doing it, Now in like July or August, I might pick up some kind of hunting material again because now I'm like really amped up and I want to be in the woods, but I can't yet. So like August is when I'll buy North American Whitetail magazine again or something like that, where it's just like, I just need to see some of this stuff. I need to read like the cheesy how you kill the big buck story, just because like I so badly want to be out there. So that's how a lot of my reading revolves, is like I'll have like a craving and I have to scratch that itch with a book. And I'm not in a, what am I trying to say here? I used to feel like I'd start a book and I had to finish that book before I could touch anything else. I used to do that. But now I look at books as like I said, like a TV. And so any given night, even in the same night, I might change the channel a couple times. I'll just go by feel. Like if I feel like digging into something heavy, then hey, I'll pick up that one book I was reading that's kind of heavy. But then you know what? At the end of the night, maybe I just want to go to sleep thinking about some adventure or whatever. And so I'll read for the last half hour just some adventure story or a fishing book or whatever it is. And I don't feel guilty about that anymore. I don't finish as many books because of that, because I'm kind of bouncing around. Like right now I could grab like 5 or 6 different books that I'm partway through. And I don't care about that anymore. That's fine by me. I'll get through them eventually. I also have given myself permission to stop reading books and not read them at all. Like life is too short. I've decided to feel obligated to read a crappy book. I used to be like, you don't quit. Like if you start something, you finish it. And I thought that with books. So I grab a book and I'd be reading it and I'm like a third of the way through or halfway through. And it's just like, man, this is just not what I was hoping it would be. And I would power through just to say I did it. And I've stopped doing that because there's just like not enough time to do that anymore.
Does that, I'm getting like vicariously nervous when you say that, because what that makes me think is like, when you give yourself permission to quit, it makes me think about running. Like when you go for a run, a lot of times and like the weather changes or something, you want to give yourself permission to quit, but you can't.
Yeah. And
so do you worry that eventually you're going to have, 100 books on your bedstand and you've only read 2 chapters of each one?
I don't think so, because this is like the one place I've given myself permission to quit. Just about everything else, I'm pretty dead set on not. Okay. But it comes down to like reading. I think I've gotten to a point where I can trust myself in assessing something, whether like I'm going to get out of this book what I thought I was going to get.
Yeah.
And I just think like going for a run, I know I'm going to get in what I put out, or I know I'm going to get out of it what I put into it.
Right.
But a book, you are dependent on what the author put into it. And if I can sense halfway through that, hey, he didn't put into this or she didn't put into this what I'm hoping to get out of it, then why am I going to waste another week of my life on that when there's another really good book waiting? There's so many books in the world. There's more books than I'll ever be able to read. So many great books. Yeah. So many great books on that bookshelf behind me that I still haven't gotten to or haven't quite finished that I know I'm going to want to. So I'm trusting myself now to sense when something is like, I'll give it a good shot, but sometimes, at least from where I'm at now, you got to pull the plug sometimes and move on to the next.
Do you?
But I mean, hey, I'm still finishing 50 plus books a year, so
yeah. All right, we'll let you.
It's not like I'm quitting on too many, Tony.
We'll let you slide, Mark. Do you? So you're working on a book, your own book right now. Do you cater your reading at all when you're like, do you use that as inspiration when you're writing, like when you're in a deep writing phase or not? You do?
Yes. So there's 3 kinds of reading that I do while writing a book. I'm doing research. for my book. So a certain amount of my reading is like reading that I'm taking notes on and studying the topic that I'm writing about, finding out new sources, finding new ideas, etc., building my wealth of knowledge. And so I've been like reading / researching for this book for years, and it's still ongoing now. And then there's some reading where I read stuff about writing. I don't know if that's something you do at all, but I've got a big section of my bookshelf behind me, but then I have a small lineup of books right in front of me right now on my computer desk. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I have like 15 books in front of me. And whenever I find myself at the desk and I get like writer's block, or I'm hitting some kind of speed bump, or I'm struggling or something, I will give myself a 5-minute break and I'll reach for one of these books and open to the bookmark or open to a random page and just read a little bit, read for a couple minutes. And it's kind of like having a mentor, like having a writing mentor there. And they might just have a good nugget for you today, or they're a little bit of inspiration or something. So I found that very helpful because I don't have like a writing background as far as like a educational background. I just picked it up myself over the years. So I've depended on the published works of other people to kind of guide me and mentor me. So I read that kind of stuff. And then the last thing I will read is I will just try to make sure that while I'm in the writing process, that some portion of what I'm reading is just like writing that I really, really like the voice, the tone, someone who just has it figured out, that I can just kind of read and like swim in that world and let that kind of marinate in that kind of thing that I enjoy so much. And I think that kind of transfers into you a little bit and helps you write well. When your mind is full of good writing, I think it helps your body create good writing. So I would say that's how I read during the writing phase. Does any of that resonate with you?
Yeah, man. I mean, I have a ton of books on writing too, but there's just certain books that there's certain authors who have a style where it's usually somebody who's like, they're so good that I just look at it and I'm like, there's no way I would ever get there, but it's kind of inspirational.
Yeah.
This is going to sound dumb, but there's certain things that I run across in my life, like certain books, that's one of the reasons I like McCarthy so much. But like, you know who Tom Morello is from Rage Against the Machine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Amazing guitarist. Amazing. There's a performance with him and Bruce Springsteen where they cover the Rage song Ghost of Tom Joad. And Tom Morello plays 2 guitar solos in there. And the first one is incredible, but the second one is like, it's something that's like so unique. There might be one person, other people could play it. There might be one person in the world who could have written that, and it's him. And so sometimes when I'm looking for inspiration for stuff, sometimes I'll be like, I got to just pull that up. Like I just got to watch that performance. And it's the same way I feel sometimes when I go back to, like I mentioned, Blood Meridian or, some other book that I've read a billion times, but I just like, it just does something for me. And so I'm not necessarily like, I need to like copy their style or try to emulate them or whatever. It's just like, just seeing how freaking good people can be at stuff is enough to just get you to just be like, I'm going to just keep plugging away at this.
Yeah. Cause it makes you want to make your own version of like something that would make someone feel that way,
Yeah.
Like that's inspirational. Like if you could somehow create something even a 10th of that good, how special that'd be.
Oh my God. 10th of that good.
Yeah.
If I could play guitar a 10th that good, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. I'd have a different career, bro.
Yeah. Well, on that note, why don't we get into some of our recommendations? I thought we could kind of go back and forth, and we each have a list of at least 5 books, getting us to our top 10, if not more. We might cover more than that, but you want to start with one and give me a spiel, tell me about it, and see if it's one I know?
Well, I'm going to start with one that I just had to put on there. And you and I actually talked about this book in Michigan. Trout Bum is just, John Gierach is just one of those books where it's like his style is just, he's so incredible. And it's an easy read, kind of adventure, kind of just, personal essays on, fly fishing, but more just life. And his, like, that book is one that I just go back to a lot. And you wouldn't have to, if you know fly fishing, it would help, but you don't have to. Like you could
Yeah,
just
I
read
think
his.
I was
Go
just
ahead.
gonna say, even if you're just an angler of any kind, I think you
Right.
would still enjoy it. It's
Right.
he is a master. Like he is someone who is just a master storyteller, and it's so full of like life and vigor. Like it's alive on the page. You feel like you're there. It's these little nuggets of like profound observation where you're just like, yes, like that's just so true. But it seems effortless. Like at no point during any of his books do you feel like it's overwritten. It's never like overly flowery or like a drag. You're just like there, but it's so beautifully created. He's really, really, really good.
Yeah. I mean, that style is, it seems so simple and accessible, but that's the like mastery of it. You know, when people try to write like writers, they don't sound like him. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
and when you talk about his observations, there, yeah, I'm sure it's in that book, but he talks about seeing a trout flash and pick up a nymph or something he was drifting through a pool and seeing the yellow belly of a brown trout and how the color is like butter in a saute pan or in a frying pan, and you're just like, that's like a
That's
perfect
it.
description for that color. And
Yeah.
I know there's another part in there where he talks about how subtle a take can be. And it's like when a dog walks by and your guitar's on a stand, like a golden retriever specifically, or some kind of like long haired dog, and its tail just brushes the strings. And most people wouldn't even register it, but you hear this like very soft, subtle thing. And I'm like, that's like such a good comparison to seeing like that, just, it's like an eighth of an inch tick in your line where it picked up your nymph, and it, like being tuned into that. Yeah. So good, man.
Man, there's something about really, really good writers that I think they begin to see the world in metaphor. By that I mean like just through their daily life, they're always kind of noticing things and connecting those dots between, oh, that thing's kind of like this thing. And that's such like a magical power. I heard a story once about F. Scott Fitzgerald and oh God, who was it? It was another famous writer at the time. It wasn't Hemingway. It was F. Scott Fitzgerald and someone else that if I said the name, everyone would be like, oh yeah, we've heard of this guy. They would drive around in the countryside and they would point at different things and they would play a metaphor game. They'd point at like a tree and then they'd have to figure out who could come up with the best metaphor like on the spot about that tree is like this, you know? And they did that just to like flex that muscle because of how important that is as a writer to be able to help paint those pictures in people's minds by connecting this thing that you're trying to describe to another thing that people have a resonance with. And John is a master at that.
Yeah. So you mentioned Hemingway. Did he make your list?
He did not make my list, but almost did. I thought about including The Old Man in the Sea.
Oh,
The Old Man in the Sea is a short one, but a really good one, and kind of one of those classics.
yeah.
But no, he's not on the list.
Man, I've read a lot of his stuff, and it just I just don't like his style. I mean,
No,
everybody likes The Old Man in the Sea,
yeah,
and I like force myself to go through. I think I read everything that he wrote at one point, and I was just like, for whatever reason, I just don't like his stuff very much. I don't know why.
I'm definitely not like a Hemingway obsessed person. Like I have not read all the stuff. I've read, Old Man in the Sea. I read back in high school a couple of the classics. I've read the Nick Adams stories. I've read what's that Africa hunting one?
Green
Fields
Hills
of
of
Green, something green. Yeah,
Green
Green Hills
Hills
of
of
Africa.
Africa. Yeah.
Yep. And it's like it's good. I actually like some of the essays. I found some of his essays that were like published in like Esquire or something like that, and some of that stuff's pretty good, like some blue
Mm-hmm.
marlin fishing and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, some of his books are just kind of actually slow. You know what I mean?
Like
Yeah,
For Whom the Bell Tolls. When I read that, I
yeah,
was like, oh my God, this is like waterboarding.
yeah. Um, So you said Trout Bum by John. I did not list Trout Bum, but I did list another John Gierach book. So I think it's worth mentioning since it's a different one. My favorite Gierach book, if I had to pick one, is actually At the Grave of the Unknown Fisherman. Have you read that one?
Yep.
Yeah. So what's cool about this one, a lot of his books are kind of random essays, scattershot about all sorts of different kind of stuff. And this is the one book he did that describes one single year from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And I kind of liked that. Just, following chronologically what his year of fishing looks like. So all the things we talked about with Trout Bum are true for this too. Just that kind of more focused narrative. And each essay kind of connected back. So he would mention something in chapter 8 that references something chapter 1 or that happened in chapter 1 or 2. That's not usually the case with his books. So this is kind of unique. I liked it a lot. So many good like one-liners and like quotes in this. Like I've got a little book that I've sometimes do better, sometimes do worse, but I've got like a little book that I try to write down like little quotes or little excerpts and books that I really like so I can go back, and you never know when you might need a quote or a little something. And there's so many from this book. And one of them I pulled out speaks exactly to what you were talking about his level of observation. So I'm going to read you just a little bit here. That's just like so true. He's talking about birding while he's fishing. So he goes out fishing, but then he ends up looking at birds and noticing all this kind of stuff around him. So he was talking about watching for birds. He's a visual birder, yada, yada, yada. And I'll pick up here. I was using the straightforward method for learning bird songs that an old bird watcher friend recommends. Namely, when you hear a bird singing, go see what it is. And this is the same kind of thing you do in fly fishing. You pay attention, piece things together, learn to actually see what you've been looking at all along. And sooner or later, you no longer have to be beaten over the head before you understand what's going on. This can take a long time, longer for some than for others. I've been at it for better than half a lifetime, and there are still days when I think I miss more than I see. Although how much you've missed is yet another one of those things that you can never know for sure unless there's someone there to point it out. So there's like these little kind of blurbs in there where he's talking about what he's seeing on the water, and then he talks about something else that's actually about life, or, I don't know. I just love it. There's so many different things like that. Such
He's
a good
so
book.
good.
All of them are so good. He's got like 16 now. So you can, spend years working your way through his library, and we could probably do a whole podcast just about his different books.
So good.
What's next for you?
You know what? On that vein, so when you texted me about this podcast, I was like, I'm gonna pick the books that either the entire book was like just stuck with me, no matter when I read it in my life, or the ones that there's like something I always want to go back to, even if it's not the entire book. And so this is probably a weird choice because there's way better writers out there. But I put Gene Hill on the list. And I don't know if you've read a lot of his stuff. He wrote the Hill Country back page for Field and Stream forever, but he has a couple different essays that are like, I just love them so much. But he has one that's not about hunting at all, called The Gentle Giant of Time, and it's in a couple of his different collections. But it's like him. I don't even really want to talk about it too much and spoil it. It's only like a 3-page read or 4-page read, but it's him kind of like realizing his own mortality through a very like unconventional way. And what I love about him, he's a bird dog writer. He's known as a bird dog writer, even though he wrote about fly fishing and a lot of other stuff. But what I love about him is like, I had this like little personal connection to him through working through Field and Stream with an editor who also edited his stuff before he died. And I remember talking to him on a hunt one time, and I was like, what's it like to work on Gene Hill stuff? And he's like, it's a freaking nightmare. He sends in handwritten pages that are full of mistakes and just full of grammar errors and stuff. But the structure's like so sound and so accessible. And I used to go back to him a lot. I don't as much anymore, but I probably like once a year find a reason to recommend that essay to somebody to maybe get them hooked. Because if you love, I mean, he's like a couple other authors that I have on my list, but if you love somebody who's like just very relatable, like very average, but can write so much better than you think. And like, if you have a real bend toward dogs like I do, and some of the things that he likes, it's just fun, thoughtful writing.
Yeah. What was the name of the essay again?
The Gentle Giant of Time.
The Gentle Giant of Time.
Yeah,
all right.
It's
I
like
have
that
not
little
read a bunch of Gene Hill stuff.
It's like that little Tom Morello solo. I just go back to it because it's so good. And it's like how, you know how this is when you're writing, books, whatever, you got to write a MeatEater article or something. Inspiration comes in weird places. Like it doesn't come a lot of times from you picking up a book and reading it and be like, oh, I'm going to break off on this topic here. It's just sometimes that stuff falls into your lap. You're out walking with the boys in the woods or something, and like an idea hits you, just like,
yeah,
it just shows up in your brain. And I think that's just the way that he writes a lot of times is like that, just being out there and being like, oh, this thing is like, this is a part of what we do, but it's also a reflection on life somehow.
So another essay that kind of is like that for me is one called The Heart of the Game by Thomas McGuane. You know that one?
Yep. I didn't put him on my list, but he was real close.
Yeah. The Heart of the Game is an incredible essay. It's in his collection of essays called Outside Chance. It's also, I think Outside Magazine published it as well. And originally, I think it was published originally in Sports Illustrated way back in the day, in like the 70s or something, when that was more of like a literary outlet. But that essay is one it's very long and it's winding, and it's all these different scenes. Some he's out hunting, some he's at his cabin, some he's just thinking about hunting or about the outside world. But all of these different little vignettes paint a picture without him really saying it. It paints a picture of kind of how he views hunting and its intersection with his life and the seriousness of that. And it's profound. It's really, really good. And that essay is also in one of the books that I did include in my list, which is called A Hunter's Heart, which is a collection of essays. The subtitle is Honest Essays on Bloodsport, and it's edited and collected by David Petersen. Have you read this one, Tony?
Mm-mm.
Man, this book I think should be required reading for like every hunter. It is so good, and it's a collection of essays from all sorts of amazing writers, all tackling different viewpoints and different perspectives and different experiences with hunting. So there's people talking in here about why they hunt. There's people talking in here about why they used to hunt, but they don't or can't anymore. There's people talking about their concerns and reservations about hunting. There's essays in here about ethics and morals and how we hunt and how we use the lives and animals that we harvest. It is like a crash course in understanding the why and how behind our hunting. And it was a book I read when I was in my early 20s that like profoundly changed how I look at what I do as a hunter. Not every single one of these essays, like I think different essays resonate differently, and some you'll be like, this isn't for me. But I think without a doubt, there are some in here that will just like leave you floored for a while and thinking for days. And I'll read a little excerpt from the introduction from the editor, David Petersen. He's talking about how, he's got a lot of friends that hunt and a lot of friends that don't hunt, and how oftentimes those two groups of people are always talking past each other. He described kind of the idea that, there's a mental picture of a group of people sitting in a circle of chairs together, but all the chairs are facing out. And that's kind of how he feels hunters and non-hunters, interact. And so the goal of this book in a certain way was to try to help those two parties come together and better understand each other. And so he says, like, unlike my urban friends, I am rural and blooded to the elbows. I've been hunting and fishing and thus killing for nearly 4 decades. Even so, I am no less torn and confused about so-called blood sport than they. It is an exceedingly complex issue and not, as self-appointed spokespersons for both sides would have it, simply right or wrong. Often as not, it's both. So much so that I sometimes think, were I not a hunter myself, lacking that intimate perspective, that hunter's heart, I suppose I could become an anti-hunter. The line is that fine. And he goes on to, and all these essays go on to describe this like complex soup of emotions and motivations and experiences that is hunting in just magical ways. So folks include in this book. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, isn't he from Colorado?
Yeah.
Do you know? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I know who he is.
He lives up in like the San Juans, I think.
So,
nearby.
What's interesting about that take, if you say the line is so fine between me being who I am and me being an anti-hunter, a lot of people are going to listen to it here, I guess, and go after him. Like, I know people have gone after him for views like that. And it's so interesting to me. I just randomly yesterday, I don't know when it published. It must've been very recently, but Pat Durkin published a piece on the MeatEater.com where the title was like, should the feds be managing our deer and elk herds or something like that?
Yeah. I read that too.
Yeah. So I was working my dogs and one of my buddies texted me and he's like, how does Durkin still have a job with MeatEater? And I texted him back. I go, what are we talking about here? And he goes, it's like he's just siding with the anti-hunters on that latest article on the MeatEater, the MeatEater.com. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to read this when I get back because I hadn't read it yet. And he laid out a case with a bunch of biologists and researchers, a very, very well done journalism. Like, you don't get the sense that Pat's taken a side either way.
No.
And he just said, a lot of people are concerned that we're managing for as many animals as possible to the detriment of some of the natural, plant life out there, and that it's not the best way to be doing this. And it's hard for state game managers to buck that trend when the voices they hear are hunters and the money that they're receiving is from hunters, even though game populations are supposed to be managed for the entire, everybody in the state. And so he just laid out a very clear case. I mean, he had Jason Sumner's in there from Missouri, who I had on, we had on Wired to Hunt last year, 2 years ago. And I read it and I was just like, this was just like an objective reporting of this thing that's going to come into our life. Like, this is going to be an issue at some point. But my buddy's perspective was he's just advocating for us to have all the deer and elk killed off and not have enough of them. And I was like, man, what a weird little like place we live in where, we're so biased toward wanting easier opportunities and more deer. And I mean, I get where he's coming from, but I'm like, his interpretation of that was so vastly different than what I got out of it. But that's like what Petersen's talking about in that intro is like, man, even though we're all here because we love the same thing. We love it for a lot of different reasons. And we see a vastly different, viable paths for how to continue on this thing. It was like a weird eye opener to me.
It's complex stuff. And I think it's so easy to get stuck in echo chambers where all we listen to is our own people with the same talking points. And we just like hammer those same talking points over and over and over again. And these days, like, cancel culture is just as alive on the conservative side, as just as alive in the hunting and fishing world as it is on the other side and the anti-hunting world or the liberal whatever world. Like, cancel culture is everywhere. And it's so easy to hear something that doesn't jive with your talking points and then just be like, F that person, shutting them down. How does this guy still have a job? He's willing to bring up an uncomfortable possibility, an uncomfortable different viewpoint than I've been told. How dare he? I think we need to engage and take in those different ideas and viewpoints, even if we don't agree with them, if only to just better understand these other ideas and these other people so that we can maybe make our own case better. That's why I think, like, man, especially today when there's all this stuff going on with ballot box biology and people coming for different hunting opportunities, right? There is momentum behind some of these anti-hunting measures. And I think most people want to, like, the approach I see from a lot of people is they want to like slam down the gates and like they're building barriers. It's like they want to like grab all the guns, pull down the gates, batter down the hatches. It's time for war. Screw these other people. And sometimes maybe that's the right approach, but sometimes actually a more effective, while it doesn't seem like what you want to do, the more pragmatic, effective perspective is actually walk across the drawbridge, walk across the moat, and talk to these people. Shake a hand and say, hey, I hear what you're saying, but I'm not sure you understand what it is we're actually doing. And maybe I don't understand your perspective too. And if we actually like understood each other better, we might realize that 85% of the time we want the same things. And if there was more of that going on, I think there would be a whole lot fewer of these problems. And this book is like that to a T. Like, this book would be the perfect thing for every hunter to read today as we're facing more and more of these challenges. This is the kind of stuff that's going to lead us to have more useful dialogue when it comes to making the case for why we should be able to hunt still today, the value we bring, why our way of life is necessary and useful and a important part of this culture. There's folks in here like Richard Nelson, Ed Abbey, A.B. Guthrie, Terry Tempest Williams, M.R. James, Bruce Woods, Jim Posowitz, David Petersen, Thomas McGuane, Thomas McIntyre, Rick Bass, Jim Harrison, Steve Bodio, Dan Crockett, Ted Williams, Russell Chatham, Guy de la Valdine, Ted Carasote, Pete Mathiasen, Barry Lopez, like big time writers talking about really important stuff. So this is like a book that you have to like chew on. It's not a book that you read for fun. It's a book you read and like it's gonna make you think. And I think that's a good thing to do sometimes. So
Definitely.
Hunter's Heart. I cannot recommend that enough.
Nice.
What do you got?
So you listed off a guy in there that I had to put on here, Jim Harrison.
Yeah.
Man, and he doesn't have like a typical here's your hunting fishing book, really. Like he has books that are laced with the outdoors. And so I did it's going to drop next week, but I have a Foundations episode called Touch Grass, bro, like coming up, about how we're generally pretty stressed out right now, anxious. Like people are they're keyed up, man. And there's so much scientific evidence. There's so much research data about how good being in green spaces is for you, being outdoors. Yeah. And so I kind of tied that together. And I think, so the book that I put on here is True North. I love it so much. I love all of Harrison's books, whatever, like they're all great. But True North is like, that kind of like he lives in Michigan, that struggle of like being kind of a trust fund baby, but like not being happy, going out into the woods over and over and over again to try to figure out how to just like keep muddling his way through life. And it's like so relatable where it's not like a writer's trick. It's like, he's like, I'm writing about a character who's going through whatever he's going through. And the natural thing to do would be to go wade into a trout stream for a few hours or go walk a 2-track to try to shoot a grouse for dinner and just kind of like, take that medicine, it's always available for you and recognizing when you need it. So it really probably wouldn't have mattered what I put on there, but I do really, really love True North. But I just love his style of just kind of like stream of conscious writing that's very, seems like it would be easy to emulate and is like impossible, because you might
Yeah.
get one paragraph that describes, like the migrating habits of some little songbird somewhere that he saw while he was standing in a trout stream thinking about this chick that just dumped him, kind of thing. And just mastery. So good.
What's the name of his essay collection that has like hunting and fishing essays in it? Something dark. Just after dark, maybe. Is that it? Just before dark. Yeah, that's it. Just before dark.
Yep.
That's a collection of nonfiction essays.
Yep.
Which there's some that are specifically like hunting, some specifically fishing, and there's some just like eating and food. He's very into food. That's another one that I'd recommend to folks. Because you can, in his fiction, so much of it feels like subtly autobiographical, don't you think?
It has to be. I mean, yeah. And he has other stuff too. Probably his most well-known, Legends of the Fall is like general population wise pretty well known, which is obviously not autobiographical probably, but a lot of his stuff is Michigan based, where he grew up, and feels very like, this definitely happened to him.
Yeah, for sure. Great stuff. So my next recommendation is very different than what we've been talking about. This one is not a thinker. This one is not literary. This one is not fancy. None of that. This is the one book on my list that is like a whitetail bow hunting specific book. It's even got a little bit of how-to in it. But it is the one whitetail hunting book that I have picked up multiple times and read because I enjoyed the story too. You ever read Whitetail Access by Chris Eberhart?
Mm-hmm.
Man, this is just like, this is a great, fun book. It's like I said, it's not Jim Harrison, but Chris takes you along with him on a ride as he takes a hunting season, traveling across the country, living out of a van, hunting by permission or on public land across North Dakota, Ohio, Wisconsin, Missouri, Michigan, I think are the states he hits. And, you're hearing about his life, like literally getting out of his van in the morning, pouring a gallon of water over his head to get cleaned up, seeing a pheasant cross the corn rows in front of him. And then he's thinking through where's he going to hunt for the evening hunt? What's the weather? What he's thinking, how he's struggling being out there for his 8th day in a row. And then he talks through his hunting strategy. You hear the stories of his hunts. There's some diagrams in here of hunting locations and stuff. So you can read this and learn stuff that will help you become a better hunter for sure. But it's also just like a fun story. Like how many folks have dreamed of taking 3 months off of work and traveling the country to hunt. It's a cool book. It's the one of these that I'm going to recommend to people that will definitely help you as a hunter. And it's also just like a good, easy read that's going to give you something to dream about too. And Chris has written some for MeatEater in the past. He wrote for me some in the past for Wired to Hunt. He's no longer with us, which is really sad, but he was a good guy, and he wrote a great book here. So can't recommend this one enough. And I understand it's hard to find this book now, I think, because I don't know if it's in print anymore, but if you can find it, it's worth it.
Yeah, he did a good job with that one.
Yeah, I've always thought that would be I'd like to write a book like that someday, because that just seems like a fun way to do a whitetail book.
That was such a sad deal.
Yeah, it was. What do you got next?
So I had to put Robert Roark on there somewhere. Just had to.
I wondered if he would be on the list. Yeah.
I love Ruark so much. Even, like you want to talk about a hardcore alcoholic who went and killed everything in Africa. Like,
yeah.
I mean, it's amazing, their stories, right? Like when they'll recount, it's kind of like Steinbeck. I don't know if you ever read
On the Road?
No, Sea of Cortez. He went with some biologists out. So, it's what he actually did. It's not East of Eden type of stuff, but he went out on a boat out in California, off the coast of California somewhere, I think, and they were studying marine biology, and he was kind of hanging along, but he was just like running through the amount of alcohol they went through on their trips. And it's like such a central thing. Harrison was like that too. I mean, it was always wine, typically. Well, not always wine, but a lot. But it's anyway, side note, Ruark, if you want to talk about somebody who can put you somewhere and like the smells of the ocean and the taste of the oysters they just caught, it was hard for me to pick. Like I wanted to go with like Horn of the Hunter or something like that, but I think if you want like a rock solid introduction to him, you can't beat The Old Man and the Boy. Like you just can't beat it. And it's very, I mean, you could give that to like a 11-year-old and they would probably love it just as much as like a 60-year-old person. Like it's a very accessible writing, but just his dynamic of like growing up with his grandpa, like teaching him how to hunt and fish, everything, and like the like ethics lessons that are just woven throughout his stories about how, like he made this decision to, shoot the quail on the ground or hunt the covey they only train the dogs on or whatever, or like, people at his grandpa punching a guy for swearing in front of women at a boat landing one time, like just stuff like that, where you're like, it's such an old school look, like, because this happened decades ago, but you can still, there's so many echoes of it that just work today. And it's like a masterpiece, man.
I have an admission to make.
You've never read it.
I own it. And I've read the beginning of it, but I've not finished it yet. That's a book that my finishing problem has been bad. I need to take that back down. Just read that sucker.
When you were talking about how like as you getting real deep into winter and maybe you can like see the light at the end of the tunnel with spring, and you're like, I got to just read stuff that puts me in a place that like adventure. That book, that was what popped into my head. Is I get like a craving for that book sometimes in like February. Where, I mean, it's an easy read. It doesn't take very long, but it's all, get you down on the coast in the Carolinas and get you out in the swamps and stuff. And it's like, I don't know, it just puts you there, man. His imagery is like, I think, unparalleled.
So you mentioned his Africa books. Do you have a different Africa book on your list?
Nope. I have one based out of India.
Okay. Interesting. Well, I was just gonna say one of the Africa related books. I don't really have any desire to hunt in Africa, but I've still found books about that time period. That you're talking about, like 20th century, those early hunts out there. Like those are just fascinating books to read, and some well done ones. One I enjoy that is a little bit over the top sometimes, but I think it's Death in the Long Grass by Peter Capstick Hathaway. I think
Peter Hathaway Capstick. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. You've read that one then?
I've read all of his stuff.
Yeah. That's pretty good too.
So I read my dad had all those books growing up. I have a whole bunch of them. They're so entertaining, and hunting, culling rogue elephants and hunting man eaters. And like his stories are wild. And I grew up, I was like, those are the best. They're the best books I've ever read. And then I met a few old school writers in the industry who told me that his stuff was total bullshit. And I have no idea whether that's true or not. And I kind of don't want to know. I kind of got the impression that they were just jealous, or maybe I just wanted them to be. But that's always like when Capstick comes up, like that's always in the back of my mind. Like they just kind of like, it's like when A Sixth Sense came out, that M. Night Shyamalan movie.
Yeah.
I was in a college class, and this dude across the table from me was talking about it, and he told the whole table that Bruce Willis was dead. And I was like, so I never got to enjoy that.
It.
Yeah. Total spoiler. And I feel the way, like when that, obviously that movie doesn't come up that often in like general conversations, but every time it's mentioned, I'm like, God dang it, that freaking guy ruined it for me. And I feel the same way about Capstick a little bit, but even if he made up 90% of it, it's still so good.
Yeah. It's enthralling. It takes you out there. You feel like you're on a pretty grand adventure. That's for sure.
So you
So
wouldn't go to Africa,
no, I want to go to Africa.
but just not to
I
hunt?
don't think I want to hunt. Maybe someday. Maybe after I go visit once. But
Mhm.
I'd like to go once with like the family and just see these creatures and see this place. Um, I don't know if the first time I want to see I don't know, a kudu or whatever, I want to shoot it. I kind of want to experience that place and just kind of, I don't know. I don't know. I just don't feel the need to go and hunt those animals right away. I just want to. It seems so rare and so. I know they're not all rare, but it just seems like so other, and also many of them are threatened. Um, and I know there's a need for hunting, and I know the conservation value of the dollars that all that brings into. So I'm not saying I've got a personal vendetta against any of that kind of stuff. It's just maybe not for me.
Yeah.
But I would like to go there and experience that place and that culture and those animals, and hoping to do that with the kids at some point here in the next
Yeah.
decade or so.
The hunting over there is weird, man. Like I did it one
Did you
time.
do it? You did it,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, I don't know, man. I get, I get every side of the Africa thing. Like some people love it. Some people want to go fill up their trophy room. Some people just love the environment and like there's a lot of reasons to do it. The hunting is, at least the hunting I experienced was really not my thing. Like but I know there's hunting over there that you can get that would be like if Steve Rinella called me up and he was like, hey, we're gonna go spot and stock Cape Buffalo. I'd be like, I would do that in a heartbeat. Like there's certain kinds of hunts and certain animals that would be a real challenge, but a lot of it, like you mentioned, threatened animals, like dudes like us are never hunting anything that would even be perceived as threatened.
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
just, if you want to talk about like lions or something like that, most of the lions that you see that are shot over there, especially like in South Africa, those lions were never wild.
Yeah.
Like you're not taking from the wild population. You see the kudu, impala, warthogs, whatever, like the plains game stuff. There's tons of that stuff over there, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's like a domestic animal trade over there. Everything's high fence. So even, they're huge places, but they're all like, well, we're bringing in more impala because our population's a little lower or whatever. It's a weird situation. And so, it's easy to kind of sit here and be like, well, we have tons of public land and we have a lot of big game animals, small game animals to hunt and look down on that. But that's just the system they have. Like like there are reasons behind that, but it is a weird, there's some stuff over there where I was like, kudu, for example, you brought up, everybody wants a great big spiral horn kudu. And I when I went over there, I was like, yeah, I want to shoot a kudu. And as soon as I had them in front of me, they were just they were just dumb. They weren't on their A game. Like they weren't paying attention. And I just was like, as soon as I watched them for a little while, I was like, I'm probably not going to shoot a kudu. And I didn't. And so but then you have like something like a gemsbuck where you're like, maybe that thing. And then they kick your ass over and over again. You're like, okay, now here's a challenge. So there's a lot built into it, but you're right. Like I would go back to photograph animals and be there, like almost probably more likely to do that than I would be to hunt, unless it was a very specific kind of hunt.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems just kind of murky, like a weird, it's so different, so outside of our norm.
Yeah.
That it's hard to really wrap your head around any of it. And I think that goes back to some of the stuff we were talking about earlier. It's so easy for folks to make assumptions, to take sides on issues when they don't really fully understand it, right? Until you actually get out there and see it for yourself and talk to people involved in it themselves. It's really hard to have an educated stance on anything. So I guess I want to be able to wrap my head around it a little bit more before I figure out how I want to fully engage,
Well, and I mean, if we're being like totally honest, Africa is a rich man's destination. What I mean? Like there's a certain kind of person who's going to go over there and it's not the dude you're going to bump into on public land in Michigan,
No.
And so there's a catering to that crowd, kind of like the Argentina dove thing. Like there's a certain kind of person who can afford to go do that and who also has the desire. And it's just really not, we're living in a different world,
Yeah. That is very true. So that is a perfect segue to one of my next book recommendations, which is a book full of stories and from a perspective that is very much like the everyman. It's very much stuff that's relatable to the best of hunters and the worst of hunters and everything in between. And this author and writer has a number of books. I wasn't sure which of them to pick, so I grabbed his latest one. But the person I'm talking about is Bill Heavey, another fellow Field and Stream writer. And Bill is hilarious. He still writes the back page column for Field and Stream. And, so I think his first collection of essays was If You Didn't Bring Jerky, What Did I Just Eat?
Yep.
And then the next one was You're Not Lost If You Can Still See the Truck. And then his latest is Should the Tent Be Burning Like That? And so all these books have, it's collections of his last page essays. So they're relatively short, probably 800 word, 1,000 word, 1,200 word type essays that are, funny observations on his hunting experiences, his fishing experiences, different adventures and things. And he's like the stumbling, bumbling, making mistakes, doing stupid stuff out there in the woods or on the water. That's a lot of his stuff. But then he also sprinkles in the kind of stuff that John Gierach does, like profound observations, deep, heartfelt insights, emotional truths. There's longer essays in these books too. He has feature stories in there as well, where he speaks about hunting or fishing as eloquently and as truthfully and as like down deep to the bones of the issue as anyone in modern literature, at least. Really good writer. So don't let his humor overshadow the fact that he's very, very good at what he does. And there's so many fun, interesting adventures to read about. So there'll be some quick laughers, and then there'll be some that make you think. Then there'll be some fun adventures that are super relatable because he takes you I'm looking at one right here where he goes on a trip to Anacostia Island. You and I were just talking about this the other day. So there's a big feature piece about him going on this hunt that's like an adventure hunt that so many people would like to do. But then his experience is that of the average hunter. He's not the expert David Petzel kind of guy, right? He's not Tony Petersen showing up and killing a big giant buck like it's a piece of cake, right? It's like Mark Kenyon trying to show up and kill a deer. All sorts of stupid things going on. Maybe make a miss or two. It's really, really good. His stuff's great, and it's a great mix of the thinking man's writing about hunting and fishing mixed with hey, let's just have a good time and laugh and enjoy the thing too. So I'd highly recommend all three of those collections.
You know what? One of his essays that I go back to a lot is Lilyfish, the one about his daughter who died of SIDS, his little baby girl, and how he goes fishing afterwards. Whew, that one is heavy, but just so well done.
It's incredible that one person can write both sides of the emotional scale so well. He can write so seriously and emotionally about such a heavy topic like that, and then you can flip 3 pages later and there's something so silly and laugh out loud funny. His range is wild that he can do that.
Well, right. And I mean, this probably seems crazy, but humor writing might be the most difficult form. I mean, it's way up there. It's way underappreciated, I think. For somebody to be able to write something that actually makes you laugh out loud is very difficult. And to do it consistently, and to do it over years and years and years, that's a skill that is just very, very few people have it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's awfully enjoyable when you find someone who can do it.
Yep. All right. You want another one from me? So yeah. I'm gonna throw this in here, kind of on the same note that we've been talking about a lot of stuff. There's a fellow named Sidney Lee. Have you ever heard of his name?
I don't think so.
So you brought up that David Petersen collection of essays, and there's I think this was in The Best Hunting Stories Ever Told. But I ran across Sidney Lee. It was just a collection of essays, and there was an essay in there called "Mercy on Beeson's Partridge," and it was so good. In fact, I reached out to him and I was like, "Man, I've read tons of hunting stuff in my life," and I was like, "This is some of the best wordsmithing that I've ever seen." And we ended up going back and forth a little bit. Super good dude. I've read a bunch of his stuff. He's got a book called "Hunting the Whole Way Home." Lives out in the Northeast somewhere. I can't remember if he's in upstate New York or somewhere, but just kind of, how like sometimes, Spotify or YouTube will feed you a song and you're just like, oh my God, this song is so badass. And it's a band you've never heard of. They never, they didn't fly as high as like you think they should have. I kind of felt that way when I started reading Sidney Lee's stuff. I'm like, there's so much talent here. Like so much. And I'm not like minimizing his career because he sold a lot of books and I think he did just fine. But when I read that Mercy on Beeson's Partridge, I was like, man, there is a skill level here that is so good. It's such a very, kind of Gierach style, kind of Harrison style, where it's like, he's talking about grouse hunting or something else, but it's really about the divorce or about the fight with the kids or whatever. So good, man.
What was the collection that was a part of again? The Best Hunting Stories Ever Told?
I think Jay Cassell put it together. I have it on my shelf somewhere, but I think that was where it is there. That was where I ran across it, but I ended up getting all of his books and reading them, and he's got some good stuff.
I'll check that out.
So a little under the radar fella.
Is that 4 or 5 from you? No.
I think that's 5. I do have one more, but we can get to. That's a totally different one.
All right. Mine is going to seem like I'm trying to cozy up to our boss for a promotion, but I
knew you'd do this, Mark. I knew it.
I can't help it. Steve, our founding father, Mr. Rinella, is one hell of a writer, and I can't help but recognize 2 of his books that are really 3 that I really, really like. But I was torn between if I should include MeatEater, the MeatEater book, or American Buffalo. Those are 2 of my favorite books. Really, really, really good. All the Steve stuff's great. I wish he would do more like this, though. Honestly, I wish he'd stop doing the cookbooks and the activity books and get back to some of this stuff because I just selfishly so much enjoyed this kind of writing from him. But MeatEater is so tied into hunting and fishing that I included this one. It's a series of stories from his hunting and fishing life that, I think though he doesn't explicitly say it, these different experiences taught him something about how hunting and fishing fits into his way of being a human. I think that might be how I describe this book and his wrestling with what that means, how to hunt, how to fish, how to live on this landscape with wild animals and eat them and do that in a way that felt right to him. Yeah. I think that's in a certain sense what this book is about. And as we all know, Steve's a great writer, great stories in here. And I started reading it back whenever it first came out, and I read like the first chapter or 2, and I actually got bored with it. Like the first chapter, like squirrel hunting and then like trapping otters or something. And it just wasn't like, for whatever reason, I set it aside. And this goes back to my quitting books, I guess. I set it aside for a while and then somehow came back to it like a year later and picked it back up. I was like, I really gotta push through and just see. And then like, as soon as you got past that, it was like, whoa, this is really, really good. And I think all that stuff was good in the beginning. I just wasn't as into squirrels, but it's very good. As you go on, there's so many different moments in there where it just resonates with you, and you're like, yes, like he's speaking truth to something that I know deep in my bones. So that's great. American Buffalo is another really, really good one. If you haven't read that, if anyone's not read that, it's a natural history of buffalo in America, but told through the story of him hunting a buffalo in Alaska. So it's a hell of an adventure. You'll learn a lot. Some of Steve's very best work there too. So not a plug for MeatEater based books. Well, that wasn't supposed to be, but I guess it is.
Yeah, I would throw in here about how much I love Steve Rinella too, just in case he might be giving out extra raises, but he's never going to listen to this.
That's true.
Steve's not sitting down listening to Wired to Hunt. Isn't
No,
it?
unfortunately not.
So speaking of weird dudes, isn't it wild when you're around him how like how when you and I are together, we talk a lot about certain kinds of fishing and we talk a lot about whitetails. We just do.
Yeah.
Like it just comes up over and over and over again. When you're with Steve, he's like that with squirrels. He's like that with trapping. I mean, when I was with him in Oklahoma last year, like how if it's October, you're going to pull your phone out 127 times a day to look at your cell camera, like see if you got any pictures showing up. Steve's got
app or whatever.
Dude, Steve's got cameras on like pond banks to like get fur bearers going by, and he'll be like, "Oh, look at the raccoons or look at the otters or whatever."
Yeah.
Like the same level of enthusiasm for something that's totally unrelatable to me, but it's like it's just a different thing for him. Like he would never do that with whitetails, but he's like geeked out of his mind about his trap line.
Yeah, man, he's got a different set of tastes, and it's worked out for him. No doubt about that.
He's doing all right, I guess.
He is.
Seems to be not struggling too much.
Do you have a final book to include?
Yeah, dude, I threw one on here just cause. Do you know who Jim Corbett is? You know that name?
Yeah. Tiger hunting, right?
What?
Tigers?
Right. Tigers and leopards. So he's got the man-eaters of like Kumaon or something. No, that's a different one. That's a different one. The man-eating Lions of Savo or whatever that one is.
Yeah.
Ghost in the Darkness based off of that.
Yeah.
But he has one about a man-eating leopard that he was tasked to go hunt called the man-eating leopard of Rudrapravang, which is a region of India, I guess. And you want to talk about like badass people, right? This is a long time ago, right? Like they're walking between villages in India, chasing down stories of a leopard that got so good at killing people that it could like tiptoe through a hut where a whole family would be sleeping, grab one person in the corner, take them out, and nobody would wake up. And I don't remember the number. I think it was like 160 people or 168 people. So this leopard went deep, and his job was like, you got to go find this thing and kill it. And it wasn't like he could get a text and they're like, hey, it grabbed a villager over here. It was like, they would be like, oh, it's a 3-day hike to go to this village where we heard rumors that somebody saw a leopard. And it's like a very kind of like point A to B recount of it, like almost like a hunting journal of just what he did. And it's like, it left him. I read that. I might have been in like middle school or high school, and it left a mark on me just as like how quickly things change, like how different the world is now than it was 100 years ago. And just like to them, that was just like, okay, well, the government needs me to go take care of this problem that's eating a bunch of people. And here's how I'm going to go about doing it. And you look at it and it's like, such a badass dude. And some of his tiger stuff, I mean, they would literally go out for a man-eating tiger. This is a smart apex predator that has figured out how to eat people real effectively. And they go stake out a little goat and then build a tree stand out of sticks up in a tree and sit there all night in the dark with an open-sighted rifle, hoping a tiger came into the poor little goat down there that's like, oh shit, this sucks. Like, this is not where I wanted to be in life. Over and over and over again. While you know that man-eater knows you're hunting it. He knows you're after him.
And it's got a taste for man.
Dude, so badass.
Yeah, that's some intense stuff. So there's a couple books related to that I got to throw out there. One is called No Beast So Fierce. And that's a recent book, came out in 2020. The subtitle is The Terrifying True Story of the Champawat Tiger, the Deadliest Animal in History. And so this tiger killed 436 people. And it's the story of Jim Corbett going and hunting this tiger and the whole thing. But it's kind of a more modern take on it, which was very well done and super interesting. And then another one called The Tiger, right? The Tiger? Yeah, The Tiger by John Vaillant.
Oh, yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's how.
Yep.
And that one's about a Siberian tiger out in Russia. And it talks all about kind of the natural history of the Siberian tiger and then how this thing happened and the hunt for it and all sorts of stuff. Just that one was terrific too. So
that was the way that ended, the way they finally get that tiger is wild.
Yeah, definitely recommend those books. Okay, one last one. I won't take too long talking about this because I've recommended it 1,000 times. But if we're talking books that hunters and anglers should read, just as a reminder, once again, everybody should read Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold. This is a great set of stories set in the natural world from one of our best observers of wildlife in the natural world. And it ends with a terrific kind of meditation on conservation, wilderness, hunting, developing a responsibility for taking care of these things and being a part of this community, not looking at wildlife and wild places as like this other thing that we can just use and take from all the time, but instead beginning to look at it as something that we are a part of, that we share with, and that we need to steward if we want to be able to keep doing these things we love. So that should be on everybody's bookshelf.
Isn't it amazing how good that book holds up?
Man, it's been around a long time and people still keep coming back to it. It's, man, one of the best.
For sure.
So those are ended up being, I think, 12, but our top 10 or 12 books that every hunter or angler should read. And man, I love talking about books. I don't know if anybody else does, but I really like it.
Hey, there might be 8 or 10 people who listen to this all the way through.
We're getting these newsletters now from our podcast team breaking down metrics, like how well our topics are doing and how well like our episodes are doing. And I think I'm purposefully going the opposite direction, doing podcasts about books that no one's going to listen to.
Dude.
But hey,
yeah, we're going to we've been joking about this a lot, kind of behind the scenes. We are going to get a lot of pressure to put out 52 rut hunting episodes a year. And it's not going to go well.
No, man, we're gonna continue to chase our curiosities and our passions and the things that light us on fire, truthfully. And I think in the end, that will make for the best product for people listening, regardless of what the numbers tell us sometimes. That's my belief, Tony. So we might get fired. We might get fired for it. But
whoa. Dude, when we got that email, I was like, are they really going to go through those Foundations episodes and try to categorize those?
Well, this is the problem, is that people are going to finally start listening to what you're putting out there, Tony. When they realize what you're putting out there into the world, you might be in real trouble.
They're going to be like, we don't know what to tell you to do because none of these make any sense to anyone.
We've been paying this guy to do what? And on that note, you should go fishing and I should get working on the next thing.
All right, buddy.
So thank you, Tony. Good luck down there in Florida. Have a blast. And to everyone listening, I will get a list of these books in the description for this podcast so that you can find it if for some reason you forgot one of them. And I will post about this on social media too. And I'd encourage you to pick up 1 or 2 or 3 of these, give them a read, do some thinking, go on an adventure through the page. Man, I know it's easy to pull up YouTube these days or watch something on TV or flip through TikTok or Instagram or whatever, but engaging with a written work, something deeper, something more substantial, it's got a special power to it. There's something different about it. If you historically have not been a reader, I would ask you to give it a chance because books do something to you and provide an experience that no other form of media does. And man, I think it's powerful. So thank you for listening. Thanks for being here, and stay wired to hunt.